Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a guest, Ibu Santi, who is a PhD candidate at Lancaster University, and she's going to deliver her presentation on the use of technology in language testing and assessment. And we really appreciate Ibu Santi for your generosity, in the middle of your research. And without further ado, let's welcome Ibu Santi. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, about your research. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you very much, Cecile, for allowing me to share. Yes, I'm a PhD student here at Lancaster University. I'm studying linguistics. And in particular, my research is in the area of language testing, in the area of assessing writing in particular. So I'm in my second year at the moment, preparing for my second year panel, actually. So I think that's the introduction. And today I'll be talking about how technology has actually played a role in language testing and assessment. And in particular, I'll be talking about the role of technology in 4 different areas of language testing, in test development, test delivery, and administration, test marking, and test validation. So I think it's important to note that these 4 areas are actually linked, and in fact they overlap, hence the diagram, even though the diagram might be a bit of kind of oversimplification of the relationship. But again, my focus is just to show you that these 4 areas are not separate. So when discussing each of the areas, I'll be citing studies and also giving you examples of tests to sort of illustrate my point. And I just want to be clear that I'm not promoting any of these tests. And I've tried to include a wide variety of tests so that you can get more exposure, and some of them are probably tests that you are already familiar with, and some others are probably tests that you are less familiar with. So in the current situation, this sort of public health crisis, where teachers and universities have been sort of forced to transfer their assessment and testing to online platform, you might expect that I would frame my presentation around the topic of online testing, but I'd rather talk about something more general, because I think I hope I'll be able to sort of introduce to you a wider range of research avenues that you would probably like to explore further later for your thesis or dissertation, if you're interested. Although I'll still be talking about online testing when I talk about test delivery or administration later. So if you've got any questions, we'll have the Q&A later after the talk. So you might want to take notes and prepare your questions while listening to the presentation. So, right, so let's start with the first part, technology and test development. So there are a couple of areas, but I'd like to focus on 2 areas in this subtopic. So the first one is in the area of corpus linguistics or corpus methods. So I personally always think that corpus linguistics as part of actually, using technology, because essentially we are making use of a large collection of language sample using specialist computer programs. So to be more specific, in test development, there are actually a lot of areas in which we can benefit from corpus methods or corpus linguistics. But I'd like to focus on 2 areas in particular. The first one is to help us understand the target language use domain, and then to define the construct that you wish to target within that particular target language use domain. So for example, you want to develop an EAP test, an English for academic purposes test, then you can use academic English corpora to help you identify and understand what kind of language is actually used in that particular domain, in English for academic purposes. And then you can later define the construct within that TLU domain that you want to target in your measurement or in your test, essentially. Okay, so hopefully by having a better understanding of the TLU domain, and then by having a clearly defined test construct, you'll be able to develop a test that will correspond to the target language use domain better. So that's one sort of application of corpus methods in test development. Another is in the development of rating scales or scoring rubrics. For example, in writing or speaking tests. So there are generally two broad approaches to rating scale development. The first one is to base the development on theories, for example, theories of language or theories of second language writing, for example, or theories of language skill development. And the second approach is actually to base the development of the rating scales on empirical data. And when you use the second approach, then you can use corpora to help you understand the language characteristics in a particular, again, target language use domain. For this one, for the development of rating scales, you can use either or both target language corpora, so consisting or containing language samples of native speakers or proficient speakers of the language, or even you can also use learner corpora. So by learner corpora, I mean corpora that contain language samples of learners, meaning the corpora will also contain mistakes, for example. So by using learner corpora, you'll be able to sort of understand, let's say, the common mistakes that learners at different proficiency levels usually make. So later, your rating scales, hopefully, will be able to sort of reflect better the different levels of proficiency or achievement of that particular test, okay? And of course, I mean, you can use a third approach, which is common as well, which is basically a hybrid or a combination of the two approaches, right? Okay, and now the next one, still in the area of technology and test development. So technology has enabled us to develop more sort of innovative tests and task types. The first one you might be familiar with already, computer adaptive tests. For example, the dynamic placement test. So it's a placement test, it's a computer-based, or in fact, you can also, I think it's also available on mobile phones as well. So the idea is that, you know, as the name suggests, computer adaptive tests, they are able to adapt the test content based on test takers' answers or performance. So for example, if you answer the initial questions correctly, then you will get increasingly difficult questions. On the other hand, if you answer items incorrectly, the next questions you will be getting will be easier. So the idea is to adapt the test content to your performance level to finally arrive at your proficiency level. And in this way, computer adaptive tests are usually considerably shorter than other tests which are not computer-based, which are not computer adaptive. Okay, and another area that is enabled by technology, and in particular computer-based testing, is the inclusion of task types and features which are more innovative. Again, for example, you can include multimodal input. Let's use the IBT TOEFL as an example. In IBT TOEFL listening, for example, so test takers, of course, they listen to the audio recording, but in addition to that, they can also see visual input in the form of still images. The idea is to sort of better replicate the real situation, the real listening situation. Okay, and also still about IBT TOEFL, they also have test items or task types which are not used in the paper-based TOEFL. For example, questions which require students to insert a sentence into a paragraph. Again, this is something that perhaps can be done in paper-based tests, but it's more sort of intuitive when it's done on computer or on computer-based environment, essentially. So what I'd like to emphasize here is that computer-based testing should not just transfer the paper pencil tests into the screen format. So test developers or teachers should really explore and take advantage of its capability so that we can make better tests, okay? Also, I mean, like, while still maintaining the quality, I think the quality is very, very important here, okay? So that was about technology and test development. Let's now move on to the second part, technology and test delivery and administration. So when we talk about test delivery or test delivery modes, I think mostly we talk about, you know, paper-based or paper pencil test versus online or computer-based tests. Okay. So yeah, this is what is probably quite relevant to the current situation of, you know, social distancing measure and lockdown in many parts of the world, where teachers are forced really to transform their tests and other assessment instruments to the online format, sort of almost overnight. And apart from other challenges that teachers and universities and schools have to face, such as in terms of logistics and technological familiarity, there are really important issues of, first of all, of test security, really. So test security is really, really important. Well, here I've got like two different types, really. So the first one is online or computer-based tests delivered at secure test centers. But now I think this is not possible in the current situation. So I'll talk more about the second one, the online tests, in which test takers can take from their home, from their place of convenience, essentially. So in terms of test security, I think the concern really is whether or not, I mean, as teachers or as test developers, we are really concerned whether students or test takers actually, take the test on their own, or whether it's possible for them to get help by, or from other people, really, especially in the case of high stakes tests. If it's more like, classroom based, which are not high stakes, it's more like in the form of assignment, probably it's fine. But in the context of, a high stakes test, this kind of security issue is really, really important. Right, but then I'm not going to talk more about test security concern, and I'll talk more about test takers' performance comparability across different delivery modes, again, online versus the paper-based, because I think this is an area that is more relevant to you. This is an area that we can have a better control over, and I'll discuss two studies. I've sent you the articles, the links really, to illustrate what I mean by test takers' performance comparability across delivery modes. So the first one is a study by Brunfaut et al. 2018. They actually investigated the delivery mode effect on test takers' performance in the area of writing. So let's see. So I'll talk a bit about the test, because it's probably a test that most of you are not familiar with. It's a test called Integrated Skills in English, or ISE, from Trinity College London. Actually, the tests, they've got 4 different proficiency levels, ISE 1 to 4, but this particular study only investigated the delivery mode, or, you know, they focused more in the first 3 levels of the test. I think ISE 1, 2, and 3 at CFR B1, B2, and C1. And there are 2 writing tasks in this test. The first one is called the reading into writing. Maybe it's a new type of task. Maybe you've heard about integrated tasks before. Well, this one is a kind of, or I can say it's a form of integrated tasks. So in this task, in this reading into writing task, test takers are required to read 4 different passages, okay? They're all on a related topic. And after reading 4 passages, they have to produce a piece of writing. So essentially, they have to summarize, synthesize, and paraphrase information from these 4 passages in the writing. And the second task is more common, is the extended writing, like most writing tasks, where test takers are presented with a prompt and they have to write a piece of writing. So the test is currently only available in paper-based mode. So they don't have the online version or the computer-based version at the moment. And that's what the researchers actually investigated. So they investigated whether if, you know, the online version were offered, whether or not this delivery mode would potentially affect test takers' performance. And their findings, so I hope you've read the paper, and here I only discuss the sort of like the main findings really. So the first one, based on the analysis of test takers' scores, they only found negligible effect on delivery mode. So like no significant effect of delivery mode. It was quite comparable whether test takers take the test the paper-based format or the online or the computer-based format, except with one exception, except for the reading in the writing task at ISE 1 or B1 level CFR. And they also sort of analyzed test takers' responses, and test takers reported generally positive attitudes towards the online mode. I think that's like, you know, students nowadays, they're more sort of comfortable typing rather than handwriting. Maybe that's part of the reason. Okay, so that's an example of delivery mode in the area of writing assessment. Now, I'll move on to the next example, which is the other article that I mentioned earlier. So this one is a speaking test, and it's IELTS Speaking to be precise. So it's a test that I think most of you are familiar with already. Again, a bit of context. I'm not going to talk about the test in detail because, again, you're familiar with it already. IELTS is currently, well, not really currently at the moment, because I think most test centers are closed at the moment, but yeah, before the closure, really, IELTS is offered in both paper-based and computer-based formats, especially for reading, listening, and writing sections. However, the speaking section of IELTS is still administered face-to-face only, whereby the examiner also acts as an interlocutor. Okay. So these researchers, Nakatsuhara et al., they investigated whether they could actually deliver the speaking part of IELTS via video conferencing. And then they analyzed the test takers' scores across 2 modes, and the finding was that, again, no statistically significant difference in terms of test scores. And they also looked at the linguistic output. They analyzed the utterances or the speaking performance, really, of the test takers. Again, they found no significant differences. In the paper, yes, there are differences, but they argue that the differences are not that significant. However, based on the analysis of examiners' responses, they reported challenges associated with video conferencing mode related to both administering the task, like asking questions. Okay. Wait. Asking questions.
Upgraded.
Sorry?
It's already upgraded.
Oh, okay. All right. Right. Yeah. So examiners reported challenges really related to administering the test because, you know, they act both as an interlocutor and an examiner. So they found that it was a bit challenging to them. Okay. And this is something, again, that is very relevant to the current situation. So even though they had this study published a couple of years ago, they had not actually started, you know, offering IELTS speaking over video conferencing until very recently. So now they have what is called IELTS indicator, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. So again, this is something that they have done recently in response to this current public health crisis, where majority of their test centers are closed and they can't really administer the test. So they've decided to offer this test, IELTS indicator, which test takers can take. It's fully online. Test takers can take from their home, including the speaking part. So the speaking test is conducted via video conference or video call, essentially, with a trained examiner. However, it's important to note that IELTS indicator, as the name suggests, it provides an indicative score, but the score cannot be used in place for the real IELTS, and especially for immigration purposes. And this test is only offered temporarily during this closure, according to the website. But what I'd like to point out is that, you know, they have this study which was done a couple of years ago. Now they can use this study to sort of justify what they're currently doing, right? So they can now claim that a speaking score on IELTS indicator is a good indication to test takers' performance in the real IELTS, because again, they've got this research to back up sort of their argument, right? Okay. So again, it was about test delivery. Usually, the most important sort of area of research is making sure whether or not test takers' performance will be comparable across different test modes. Right, so now let's move on to the next bit. It's technology and test marking. And I'd like to talk about 3 areas which within test marking. The first one is in the area of speaking again, in the area of especially delayed ratings, in which we can use either the audio recording or the video recording of the speaking performance. And the second thing I'd like to talk about is in the area of rater training, whether the face-to-face or online rater training mode will be comparably effective, especially the online one. The question is whether the online one is as effective as the face-to-face one, which is the common practice. And I'll talk a bit about it should be automated scoring system for projective skills. So let's start with test marking, the first one. Again, it's a study done on IELTS Speaking by Nakatsuhara et al., but it's a different study from the previous one. So they looked at the possibility of double rating. So again, the context. So IELTS Speaking is generally, at the moment, single marked by the examiner, who is also the interlocutor during the face-to-face IELTS Speaking test administration. But, you know, we all know that double rating offers great potential to enhance the scoring validity or the reliability of the marking, which is a very important quality for a test. The question is now, which one is better, really? The audio rating or the video rating? By audio rating, I mean rating based on the audio recordings of the performance, the test taker's performance. And again, the findings suggested that video ratings were similar to live ratings, which is the current system. Okay, I think that makes sense because again, the examiners can see, you know, the visual clues as well as the audio. And on the other hand, the audio ratings were significantly lower than video ratings in all rating categories: fluency, grammar, lexis, and pronunciation. Okay, because you know, the examiners reported some challenges associated with audio ratings because of the lack of visual information. They reported that visual information actually helped them understand test takers' utterances better, because there are, you know, if there are pauses, if there are, you know, pauses, or perhaps if there's reluctance, they can sort of try to understand what's really happening. Okay. Right, so that was about the marking of speaking. Now let's turn to rater training. And this time it's a study by Nock et al. Yes. So the norm for rater training is actually, it's usually done face-to-face, but we all know it's very costly and impractical because we have to bring together raters who usually live in different parts of the country. You know, testing organizations, they have to pay for transport, lodging, etc., etc. So very impractical, really. So they looked at the possibility or the sort of the effectiveness, really, of online rater training. And the test, they was associated with the training with the active test by the British Council. And the findings, interesting, they found no major differences between the face-to-face and the online rater groups, although the online rater group was slightly less consistent in their rating performance, while the face-to-face group was slightly overly consistent. I put it in italics because you might wonder what's wrong with overly consistent. It is something not desirable actually when raters are overly consistent, because they are human beings, so they shouldn't be overly consistent. Yeah, which is funny, right? I mean, like, it's a bit sort of counterintuitive, but that's how it is. Yeah, and another thing they found was that raters reported positive attitudes to both modes, and in general they felt adequately trained, which was very good, although like slightly less so for the online group, but still sort of comparable. Okay. Okay, the next bit about automated scoring systems, or some people call them e-raters. Essentially, they are computer algorithm designed to mark speaking and writing performances, and they've been used in a number of large-scale tests. For example, the PT academic, Pearson Test of English academic, it's entirely marked by e-raters. And also it's currently used in Linguaskill. It's a new test from Cambridge Assessment. Of course, we all know the advantages include reliable marking, because again, it's machine doing the work. So it's more objective, and it will be very, very reliable because it's been taught to be reliable, right? And increased time efficiency, because of course, like, it can work without breaks. I mean, they probably need breaks, but not as often as human raters would. And they can do it very fast as well. And I argue that I think in the long run, there is a potential cost efficiency. Of course, the initial investment in the development is massive, I would say. But in the long run, I think it's going to be cheaper rather than paying raters. But again, I mean, it's probably only doable or practical for large-scale tests, okay? But then there are important questions surrounding e-raters. I will not be able to answer all of them, but sort of questions that we need to ask ourselves, really. So the first one, when using e-raters or machine raters, to what extent can e-raters actually measure all aspects of the test construct, okay? Can they measure everything that we want to measure, for example? Let's see. So, for example, if you have an academic essay writing task, okay, and you use e-raters, of course, e-raters are able to assess areas like grammatical accuracy, right? Machines can be taught to detect mistakes, grammar mistakes. They can also detect or measure vocabulary sophistication. They can measure length very easily. They can also measure syntactic complexity, whether the test taker only uses, limited range of grammar or wide range of grammar. These things can be evaluated or assessed by e-raters. But of course, we also want, to measure the content, like the strength of argument. For example, we want to measure style, register, whether it's academic enough or not, for example. The question is, can e-raters measure strength of argument? Probably not at the moment, although I know that researchers are currently working on developing more and more sophisticated machines to do the job, but probably at the moment it's not something that E-raters can do really well. So then it might risk the construct measurement. There's a term called construct underrepresentation, which is a very serious threat to validity, because there is an important part of the construct which cannot be measured. So that's why the term construct underrepresentation. And the next question is regarding assessment for learning, where feedback is very, very important. So the question is now, can machine raters generate useful feedback to promote learning? I don't know. There is an interesting article, very recent, by Gu et al. 2020. It's on, I forgot to mention that. It's on, it's called Speech Rater. It's an E-rater developed by ETS to measure speaking. And Gu et al. Investigated the user perception, whether teachers and students feel that the feedback is useful for them. That's very interesting, really. Okay, the next questions. Is it justifiable for us then to rely only on E-raters when, especially in high-stakes tests, knowing that they do have some weaknesses? And perhaps, can or should they be used in tandem with human raters? Maybe, okay. Right, there is actually a recent publication by Zegner and Evanin. If you're interested in this area of automated speaking assessment, you can have a look at this one. I think I'll just skip this part of it. And moving on to the technology and test validation. Again, this is the final section. I think it's important to note that all the studies I've discussed so far, to varying degrees, can be considered as part of validation studies. But in this part, I'd like to talk about a couple of studies which are essentially like more closely related to validation. And the first part is a study done by Staples et al. They used computer-based register analysis to investigate the authenticity of IBT writing tasks. As you know, you probably know already that IBT TOEFL has 2 writing tasks. The first one is an integrated reading, listening, writing task, and the second one is an independent writing task. And Staples et al. Compared test takers' writing responses to these 2 tasks with disciplinary writing. By disciplinary writing, I mean actual writing assignments done by students in higher education. And the findings are really interesting. Integrated task responses showed similarity to certain disciplinary writing tasks, and on the other hand, independent tasks were found to be linguistically different from almost all disciplinary tasks included in the study. So this is very interesting. Again, this is about authenticity. So we can see from this results that integrated tasks perhaps better resemble the actual writing assignments in higher education context. And if you're interested in this kind of study, you can use academic English corpora available. They are widely available and you can use them. Right, and the next bit is it's in the area of, I can say, cognitive validity. It's done by Sathina Chan, where she investigated the reading into writing processes of 2 students using software called keystroke logging. And the test, it was a test made by a Taiwanese testing body. The test is called General English Proficiency Test Advanced, the writing task 1. So the findings suggested that different processes, different reading into writing processes actually affected different sort of performance levels. But I really want to emphasize here that the study only involved 2 participants, so interpret this finding with real extra care. The reason why I included this study in my presentation is because I think this is a study that you can replicate for your thesis or dissertation, because keystroke logging software is widely available, and it's very doable to sort of replicate this kind of study. All right, the next one is probably the next 2 studies. This one is done by Brunfaut and McRae. They used eye tracking and stimulated recall. Probably this is something quite new to most of you. They use eye tracking to investigate the construct measured by different task types, one of which is called banked gap fill. I think I believe you have seen this kind of task. So it's gap fill, but the answer choices are provided. Okay, that's why we call it banked gap fill. And the test was aptitude test by the British Council. And I just mentioned some of the findings related to the banked gap fill item. So the banked gap fill items were intended to measure reading comprehension, actually. And again, yes, they found that these items generally target this construct, reading comprehension. However, they also found that some items were actually solved primarily by the help of vocabulary and grammar clues, not reading comprehension. So this is something like some of the items did not target the intended construct, I can say, because they wanted to test reading comprehension, but then test takers could actually solve the questions using vocabulary and grammar clues. So again, with this kind of technology and research design, they were able to investigate whether certain tests actually really target the construct intended to be measured or not. Okay. And the final one is a study done by Winke Lim, 2015. It's more on the area of scoring validity. So they investigated raters' use of analytic rating scale for writing, and similar to Brunfaut and McRae, they also use eye tracking to collect the data. Interesting findings. I'll just show you, because again, this is something perhaps quite new to most of you. It's new to me as well, actually. So I'll show you what it looks like. So I'm not sure if you can see the, well, you don't have to read the descriptors, but I hope you're able to see the, the criteria in the rating scale. So I'll just tell you there are 5 criteria: content, organization, vocabulary, language use, and mechanics. It's interesting that they found that raters paid different amount of attention to these criteria. So in other words, these criteria did not receive the same amount of attention. Okay? Well, actually, they probably should. Well, let's see. Okay, So mechanics, which is the last criterion, okay, the far right, received the least attention based on the eye tracking metrics. And why? You might wonder, like, why mechanics received the least attention, really? Well, unfortunately, they didn't really investigate further because they only used eye tracking, so they only got results from the eye tracking measures. But they speculated perhaps it was due to what is called primacy effect, because it's positioned last, okay, as the last one in the list. Therefore, it received the least attention, because they also found that content and organization, which are the first two, actually received significantly more attention. So now the next question will be, does layout matter? Okay, and this was further investigated, actually. I didn't put the reference here, but this was further investigated by Winke's student, Laura Ballard, in her PhD thesis. I can probably add the reference later if you're interested. So again, perhaps even the layout of a rating scale matter, and that can be an area of investigation. Another thing they found using eye tracking was that two raters who agreed the most actually displayed very similar eye tracking or patterns or traces. And two raters who agreed the least, they also, conversely, they displayed really, really different patterns of eye traces. So we can tell directly from sort of rater behavior whether they will sort of agree or they will disagree on their rating. So again, it's something, there is really a potential research avenue using this kind of technology. And actually at UI, the Faculty of Computer Sciences, they have the technology, this eye tracking technology, because I think they also do a lot of research in this sort of area or using eye tracking. So I'd like to just summarize, really. So we've looked at 4 different areas, and in test development we've talked about corpus methods, computer adaptive testing, and the inclusion of different types of multimodal input. And in test delivery, we looked at the comparability between computer-based and paper-based testing. And in test marking, we looked at video versus audio recording ratings, face-to-face versus online rater training, and we looked a bit about automated scoring system. And the final part in test validation, we'll look at the use of corpus methods or corpus linguistics, and also looking at different types of technology to investigate different areas of validity. And I've got all the references here if you're interested and you want to read further in preparation for your research, for example. And I also listed the different tests I mentioned. I hope I didn't, I hope I included all of them. If you want to know more about all these different tests, so you can read more.
Well, thank you, Ibu Santi, for a very enlightening session. Yeah, I hope this will inspire you, students, with new topics for your thesis proposal. Yeah, so that we will have more varieties of research. Once again, thank you, and hope we can see you again in a different occasion.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.